Economic justice. I know you've been having conversations about workers in the food system, farm workers, food chain workers, and that's so important to make sure that workers' rights are guaranteed. And I would say food sovereignty also deepens that to say, you know what, we actually need a fundamentally different economic system. That the current economic system of capitalism is not working. We can't have food sovereignty under it. We need to create new economic models, a lot of things around worker cooperatives, collective ownership and stewardship of land, of water, of seeds, things like that. Climate justice, racial justice, gender justice, all of these are part of a food sovereignty vision. So this is a little fun segue to the next part. One of my all-time favorite movies since I was little was The Wizard of Oz, and The Wiz more recently. And there's a couple of themes I want to draw on from that. So one is, I think, for food sovereignty movements and movements in general, we really need to make sure that we are using our brains. So that's the scarecrow. But we have to have our eyes open. We can't be fooled by interests that are trying to sell us false solutions. So I know you were talking in other classes about the Green Revolution. And this is one of the big things that has really been promoted as supposedly a solution to hunger, as supposedly a solution even to climate change. The package of corporate seeds and pesticides, herbicides and chemical fertilizers, it's supposed to be this kind of magic combination. But we know that seeds that are part of that are out of farmers' control. We know that the pesticides and the herbicides are killing all forms of life that are really needed for good biodiverse systems. We know that monocrops are also reducing biological diversity that we need to be resilient. We know that the chemical fertilizers are creating massive pollution. All of this contributes to climate change. So we really have to be using our heads and have a clear analysis of what the problems of this are. And it doesn't stop with the Green Revolution. There's newer incarnations. So how many people have heard about climate smart agriculture? Only a couple. So this is something new that's coming out from the UN with a lot of support from large-scale corporate interests that is supposed to be another magic pill, supposed to be another, we need to address the drought and the flooding and all these conditions. And the way we're going to do that is with these packages of corporate seeds and pesticides and fertilizers and all of that. Sounds familiar. So a lot of people in social movements we're working with are saying this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. This is another example that just is carrying forward the message of the Green Revolution under a new name. So we need to be really clear about what the false solutions are, and then we need to talk about what we really want. What are the real solutions that are getting at the root causes of the injustices in the food system? And this is a diagram from our friends at the Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. Has anybody here heard of them? Awesome. So they're an awesome group actually based right here out of the Bay Area, Berkeley and Oakland, California. Definitely encourage you to check them out. I'm on their planning committees, to be transparent. But this is a diagram they put together to think about how to create a political strategy around real solutions. One of the difficulties is that sometimes people say, well, you have to do what's politically feasible. You have to focus on what's politically realistic. And so, you can't go creating these big, huge demands for, well, we want to have free school food, free school lunches, and have all the farmers providing food for all of that. Or we can't have a completely community-controlled land or all of this, right? Has anybody heard people say that stuff like that is just not realistic? Yeah, so I think we hear that a lot. But actually, we know that what's politically realistic is not static. So if you look at this diagram, that's the circle in the middle. The false solutions, often overlap with what's politically realistic because of a lot of the interests that keep them there. Oh, okay. Cancel. Sorry about that. But actually, you know, there's a lot of real solutions. Some of them overlap with what's politically realistic. Some of them don't. But we can actually take action to change that. So, you know, we can move what we really need more into the realm of politically realistic and move out the false solutions from that realm. And the way that we do that is through grassroots organizing and through movement building. So that's why I think it's really helpful to just keep our eyes on the prize, to remember what we really want, and then take action and use strategies that will get us there. So this is a picture of a farm somewhere that, this could be a farm in a lot of different places. It's a beautiful, biodiverse, agroecological farm. Any guesses where this is? It's going to be hard to guess. This could be right here in Berkeley, right? Okay, how about with this picture? Does that give you a clue? Can anybody recognize those flags? Someone say something? Brazil, yeah, absolutely. And do you know what's the name of this group? Absolutely, the MST, the Landless Workers Movement in Brazil. So this is one of our partners, one of the organizations. It's also part of Via Campesina. It's an internationally known social movement. And this is a picture of land occupation where people were in really a standoff. People who are trying to take back land to farm on it and live on it and feed themselves and their families. And then you see the military. The MST started 31 years ago, and it's been a real struggle, but they've had huge wins. It started by landless people who were living in favelas outside of cities in Brazil, and many of them had been pushed off their land by a lot of neoliberal economic forces, by large landholders, by corporate elites. But they knew that there was a lot of land that was in other people's hands and was not being used. So the Brazilian Constitution actually says that land that's not being used for other productive purposes, people can occupy it, and then if they produce on it, it can become theirs. That's a pretty amazing thing to have in the Constitution. So over the past 31 years, the MST is organized, and over 370,000 families have gained collective title to land through occupying it. And over 2,500 land occupations, so from several hundred to several thousand families. Together, they've won 7.5 million hectares of land that they've taken back for communities. So this is just staggering, that if you put all that land together, it's as big as the size of Massachusetts, where I live. So I think that just shows how much more is possible, that there really are movements that around the world are having an impact and getting to scale. And they're doing that by deep political education. They don't just go to the land and say, okay, we're just going to take it. They do a lot of work with people to analyze, okay, what's happening? What are our current conditions? What are the root causes? How can we overcome them? How can we prepare? So that's the brains. So what's another concept in The Wizard of Oz that you all know of, or The Wiz? Brains. What else? Heart. Yeah. So, and I know this was part of one of the other talks. I think also Raj Patel said we have to start from love, to start from who you care about, and go from there. And so that made me think about my own entry into this work, and it started with my own family. So, well, I want to recognize what my nephew, Lucas, who's 2 years old today. It's his birthday. Happy birthday, Lucas. And I got into this work after Hurricane Katrina, and my now almost 8-year-old nephew, Elias, was born. And my mother was holding him. She's holding him, the way people hold babies. And she said, "What will this world be like for you 20 years from now?" And she was full of all this joy and wonder in her voice, imagining what the future might bring. And I was a wreck. I was a waterfall. I was deeply, deeply sad thinking about the future that my nieces and nephews, the people I love very dearly, are inheriting. And I was also, in addition to Katrina, was thinking about my family back home in Ethiopia and impacts of climate change there, drought and impacts on farmers. And so that was pretty tough. I think it's an important place to start. And that's what really made me think about the connection between climate justice and food sovereignty. This is a picture of the Stern report, the Stern Review, which is a pretty mainstream report about the impacts of climate change. And it shows how basically with less than 2 degrees centigrade of global warming, global temperature increase, agriculture systems in Africa are going to be devastated. And so that's also that's people I love. It's people a lot of us love. And it made me think, you know what, reflecting on it over the past few months, I'm actually thinking about how really food sovereignty and climate justice are very much about Black Lives Matter. Because who are the communities that are experiencing a lot of the first and most severe impacts of food injustices in the food system and of climate change? A lot of people throughout the African continent, a lot of communities of color in the US, Haiti, I mean, all over. But for me, starting from that place of love, that's where it took me to. And I think Michael Pollan talked about the connections between food and climate change with the percentage, and there's different percentages. This is a source from our allies at an international group called GRAIN that estimates that between 44 and 56% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the industrial agriculture system, taking into account a lot of different things, not only production, but also the land use change being one critical factor, transportation, and also processing, packaging, retail, waste. So that's the bad news, but it's also the good news, because it also shows us how much we can actually create solutions by addressing all of that.